Hello everyone, you're watching the channel Stories of Our Life. Friends, make yourselves comfortable. I wish you to truly enjoy listening to this life story.
Ava has an anniversary today. 40 years is a date that is not supposed to be celebrated. To be honest, she didn't intend to celebrate it, not because it was bad luck, she didn't really believe in it, but just so. What kind of holiday is it? Every year we only get older, there's nothing to celebrate. That was the woman's reflection on her way home from work. Before, when her husband was alive, the house was always full of guests. But after his death, the apartment became quiet and sad. Her son grew up a long time ago and joined the army. After he was discharged from there, he stayed away from home, worked, and got a good job. That is all that the mother needs. Happy is the son, happy is she. Before she knew it, she was approaching her home, and suddenly she heard Jessica, the housekeeper, cursing so loudly that she could hear her around the corner. Ava went quickly to find out what had happened. It turned out that the neighbor was trying to chase the bums away from their house. "Jessica, why are you yelling like that? You're the only one I can hear around the corner," Ava smiled. "I'm sick of these vagrants." The elderly woman continued to be indignant. "Why did they settle here? They smell awful. I can't even open the window." "Well, I don't know," Ava shrugged, looking toward the garbage cans. "It's not them that smell, it's probably the garbage itself. And you're in a bad mood. Maybe they have nowhere to go." "That's good for you, Ava, to reason. You live on the 5th floor, and I live on the ground one. You can expect anything from these people." She nodded toward the homeless. Ava took another look at the tramps. The 5 of them were sitting by the garbage cans, talking, trying not to pay attention to Jessica's shouts. But it wasn't that surprised Ava, it was the peculiar appearance of one of the men. All of them were in dirty, shabby clothes, torn in places, but he was sitting a little farther away. He was wearing a hat that was immediately striking. And he looked more decent, if this word is even appropriate here. All in all, the 5th vagabond stood out from their company. Unhappy people, thought Ava, and went home. Through the window she could see that Jessica had gotten the vagrants to leave after all. But in the morning, rushing to work, Ava noticed that the man in the hat, I couldn't call him a bum, was back in the same spot. He sat motionless with his head on his chest. Probably, he's asleep, Ava thought, and as she turned the corner of the house, she hurried to the bus. She went to work today with pleasure. That's obvious, it was Friday, the most pleasant day of the week. Everyone was relaxed. After lunch, of course, no one would conclude any contracts, but, on the contrary, people would share plans for the coming weekend. Some would go to a barbecue, some to a cottage, some to a tourist base, in a word, to whomever the finances allowed. Ava was no exception, and she always liked to make plans for the weekend on Fridays, too. On that day she could leave work earlier and go to the supermarket to buy everything she needed. And on Saturday, early in the morning, she would drive to her favorite country house. She would rush there on the very first bus. This Saturday was no exception. When she left the house, it wasn't even 7 a.m. yet. Hat, that's what she nicknamed the strange hobo, for some reason sat still there. On her way to the bus stop, Ava stopped by the trash cans to drop off a bag, and as she passed Hat, she heard, "Isn't it a little early for work?" Ava flinched in surprise, but then mentally noted that the voice was pleasant and even intelligent. "No, it's my day off," the woman replied. "I'm going to the country house. There I will rest and work in the fresh air at the same time. It must be hard to work alone at the cottage." Ava didn't know what to say to that, so she smiled and just shrugged. "Can I join you?" the homeless man suddenly asked. "Don't mind that I'm homeless. I can do anything. You could use a man's strength. I don't need money either. I just want to be useful." "You're right," Ava smiled, "there's plenty to do at the cottage. But how are you going to get on the bus dressed like that?" She was terribly uncomfortable saying that, but she couldn't keep quiet either. When she saw the man droop, she immediately suggested, "You know, I have some men's clothes at home, left by my husband, they're clean, even ironed. I could bring them to you, and you could change and come with me. I agree, smiled Hat. After a little while, a rather handsome man stood in front of Ava, wearing a jacket and pants that were almost new, worn a couple of times. By the way, I have a bathhouse there, too. So you can take a bath, Ava said on the way. They rode on the bus in silence. It took them about 40 minutes to get there. Ava's garden was wonderful, everything was clean and was located in proper places. It could be perfectly seen that the landlady was keeping an eye on it. Come in, Ava invited the man and then added, oh, I haven't even acquaint. I'm Ava. And I'm Matthew, the man smiled. Well, that's it, Matthew, take care of the bath then. Clean it up, melt, steam, and then we'll have lunch. When Matthew came out of the bathhouse, Ava almost dropped the cups from her hands in surprise. A handsome man of about 45, 50 at the most, was standing in front of her. A bit thin, which was not surprising in his way of life, but it did not spoil him at all. He had shaved, combed his hair, and put on a clean shirt. What a change, Ava smiled, you are unrecognizable. Have a seat, Matthew, I've made soup, and then we'll have tea and cookies. And then you'll tell me something, if you want to, of course. To be honest, you don't look like an ordinary vagabond. You stand out from the others. The man smiled and said, let me introduce myself. I'm Matthew, a former owner of a building company. Well, if that's the case, Ava smiled, then let me also introduce myself properly, Ava, a leading manager of a real estate company, and she shook his hand. After lunch, they had tea for a long time, then they picked apples. Matthew hauled and neatly stacked the boards. He was taking a lot of garbage to the landfill, while Ava was picking raspberries and gooseberries. In the evening they took plaids from the house and gazed for a long time at the sky, where bright stars lit up here and there. The man told Ava about the stars, about the galaxy, about the planets. She listened to him as if mesmerized, and then she asked, Matthew, are you also an astronomer? How do you know so much? You never cease to amaze me, frankly. I'm obsessed with stars. They're my hobby, the man said, ever since high school. Astronomy classes instilled in me a love for everything mysterious in this world. And that's all thanks to our teacher. Only now I understand that she was a person in her place. You know, she told us so fascinatingly about her subject that after the bell nobody even moved. It was very interesting. There probably aren't even teachers like that now, or very few of them. They chatted about the stars for a long time, and Ava caught herself thinking that it was really interesting with him. When they went to bed, it was 3 in the morning. The next day Ava woke up late, the clock showed 10:30. To her surprise, she saw that Matthew working hard. She had set his workload yesterday, and it was obvious from the amount of work he had done that he, unlike her, was up very early. At the end of the day she said, good job. Next week, if the weather holds, we'll have to get all the fruit trees and shrubs in order. Will you join me, won't you? And she looked at Matthew, smiling. Sure, replied Matthew, but suddenly asked, you know, Ava, I've been thinking. Can I stay here? I'll work on the property all week, and you can come next weekend, in any weather. But not to work at the country house, but to rest from the work week. Ava agreed, and he, beaming with happiness, walked her to the bus. As Ava approached the house, she was in for a not-so-pleasant surprise. At the entrance she saw almost all the neighbors, who were discussing something, but when they saw Ava, they quieted down. Good evening, everyone. The woman said with a smile and was about to go into the entryway when she was called out by a Jessica entryway supervisor. Though, this evening is good only for you. Where did you put our bum? Tell me. Jessica demanded loudly. There was one decent bum in the whole yard, and now they say you picked him up yesterday and took him somewhere with you. That's it, the man's gone. Tell me the truth. Ava was confused at first, not knowing what to say. She wanted to put Jessica in her place, because the older woman was clearly being tactless and out of line. But the age difference did not allow Ava to say what she thought of her. How should I know where your bums are? You chased them all away yesterday, Ava replied. Don't deceive us, Ava. We all saw out the window yesterday how you were kindly chatting with him and you give him some clothes as well. And then you left together. Of course, we understand that you are a young, lonely woman, but understand, Ava, this is not the way. You can't help all the homeless people. He'll rob you, and then he'll come to us. They're the scum of the earth. You can expect anything from them. Ava couldn't believe her ears. Jessica was reprimanding her like a delinquent teenager. Jessica, she said, looking the woman in the eye, let's end your lecture on that lovely note. Thanks God, I'm not stupid. Having lived to be 40 years old, I've learned more or less how to understand people. Let me decide for myself who to give what to, who to talk to, and who to help. Why? Are you offended? Jessica fluttered her arms. I mean well, silly girl. I mean well. Ava, I respect you. And James, God rest his soul, I loved him like a son. My James was respected by everyone, but that doesn't give you the right to pry into my life. Good evening. So Ava went to her apartment. The neighbors were even upset. We didn't get to talk, and we couldn't find out the most interesting thing. Where did Ava take the homeless man? No, look at her, Jessica said, taking a seat on the bench. She's an adult. When something happens, she asks for help, and when she helps the homeless, she'll figure it out herself. How am I supposed to keep order now? Let's let all the homeless people go to their apartments, and let them do whatever they want. Jessica, what are you picking on her for? There's no homeless man, so she didn't take him in. She gave him clothes, she's got a warm heart. Maybe now he can get a job, get his documents back, and live like a human being. The neighbors immediately stood up for Ava. So now you've made me guilty, too. You asked me to find out where the bum was. And now. Oh, you, and she waved her hand at them and went back to her house. Ava took a shower, poured herself some fragrant tea with lemon, and sat down by the window. The neighbors, but not all of them, were still sitting on the bench outside the house, discussing something, but Ava did not care about them. She thought of her new acquaintance, such a nice man. Such a pleasant man. He was in trouble, but that can happen to anyone. Maybe they set him up, tricked him, took his company. In business, especially big one, you can expect anything. I wonder if he was married. She didn't want to ask him about the past. She decided that if he wanted to, he would tell her everything himself. But he would only tell her if he knew he could trust her. With these thoughts in mind, the woman went to bed. In her dream, Ava saw him again, Matthew. After work the next day, she really wanted to go to the cottage. I wonder if that's how he's doing, thought the woman, and suddenly the cell phone rang. A name popped up on the screen, Mia, a neighbor from the cottage. Hello, Mia, Ava answered quickly. Hi, Ava, I'm calling to warn you that there's been a man in your orchard all day. Have you hired an employee? The neighbor worried. No, Mia, it's my good friend who asked me to stay there in the fresh air. He doesn't have his own country house, so I let him in. It's good for him, and I could use the help. Do not worry. He's a wonderful man, she reassured Mia. Oh, what a relief, Ava. All right then, I didn't know what to do. It's okay, Ava smiled, I'll come tomorrow and check on him. Thank you, Mia, for keeping an eye on my lot. Ava really wanted to go today, but there was no reason for it. But tomorrow you can bring groceries. He would probably run out of food by now. She went to the store and bought everything she needed, so she wouldn't waste time after work tomorrow and go straight to the cottage. The next day Ava left work without going home and rushed to the bus. Sitting in the transport, she thought about the possibility of staying there overnight, because the last warm days were standing. Soon it would be autumn, raining, cold, slushy. I must tell Matthew to repair the furnace. If he can, of course. You can't live there without a stove in winter. She caught herself thinking that she was going to keep the man all winter. So what? Ava smiled at her own thoughts, looking out the bus window. Let her live in her son's little room. It'll be more fun at the cottage. We'll drink tea there on snowy winter evenings, and he'll tell me about the stars. She was sure he knew a lot more. It was obvious from his clear, literate speech that he was a very well-read man. What am I doing? She suddenly stopped herself mentally. Don't I have anything else to think about but him? I'm out of my mind. After a while, she found an excuse for her own thoughts. It's just that, Ava, everyone needs someone to take care of in this life. You used to take care of your husband and son, now you take care of Matthew. And that's perfectly normal, because you have so much unspent love and tenderness left in you. You have to give it to someone. And you certainly don't have to be embarrassed about it. Call it all in one word, care, her inner voice prompted the woman. Matthew really managed to revive her heart with an avalanche of unspent tenderness and bring back to life one who had long ago buried herself as a woman. Matthew, meanwhile, was at work in the country house. He liked it there, and he was happy. How good this Ava was for letting him stay. He did not want to admit to himself that he thought of her not just as a good person, but as a woman. He had locked his heart in a huge barn door a long time ago. So long ago that the key to it was lost, it seemed forever. And there was no other way to open it. But he felt that even the absence of the key did not prevent his unhappy heart from opening. Even with a creak, with a glance, but it was already ajar. And the reason for that was Ava. God, what a beautiful name. That was the name of his mother, the most wonderful woman in the world. She was long gone from this world, but in Matthew's memory she would always be there. The man had been in a good mood all morning. He knew Ava was coming today, so he heated the bathhouse. He was waiting for her. And the great thing was that yesterday Matthew had managed to earn some money. In the morning he went to the barber shop for a haircut, went to the store and bought a bottle of champagne, some candy and one rose. He counted everything penny for penny. And Matthew was unusually proud of himself. Yesterday a neighbor, an old woman, asked him to fix her porch. But when he refused to charge her for the work, she took offense. All labor must be paid. I can't give much, but it's no good for free either, she said in an unobjectionable tone, and slipped the money into the man's shirt pocket herself. Matthew agreed, knowing that he needed the money. In the evening, two friends of the same neighbor came to see the man. One asked them to fix the wicket and the other to cut down an old cherry tree. That's how Matthew got enough money. Upon entering the lot, Ava gasped. The order was perfect. Matthew had collected and burned all the leaves and had already begun to dig up the ground. In front of the house was a freshly painted new porch. He had found new boards in the barn yesterday and decided to build a porch, painted it overnight, and by morning it was ready to greet its mistress. After entering the house, Ava was speechless. There was a bottle of champagne on the table, 2 shiny glasses, because he couldn't find any wine glasses, and a rose in a vase. And the man also lit a candle to add some romance to this beautiful evening. He could see that she liked everything and was damn pleased with himself. The hearts of both of them were pounding. As they looked into each other's eyes, they knew that they were both glad they had met. Matthew, where did all this come from? Whispered Ava, and you also got a haircut. You are unrecognizable. Thank you, he replied, I really wanted to surprise you. I wish to do you a favor, to repay you somehow for the good you've done for me. I earned the money by helping your neighbors. They're very kind. Well, sit down, let's celebrate, he said and pulled back a chair, inviting me to the table. The evening was a success. They even danced, and were embarrassed as schoolchildren. Ava had had few joys since her husband's death, so the surprise Matthew had given her had thrilled her. Then they watched the stars again, and he told her many more interesting things. In the morning she hurried to work, and Matthew continued to work on the property. The woman caught herself smiling the whole way. She thought back to last night and just couldn't help it. Eventually, reflecting, she drove through her stop and was late for work for the first time in 10 years. The sun was slowly setting below the horizon, leaving behind a crimson sunset. Autumn and cold was approaching, and the setting sun told us that tomorrow there would be strong winds. Matthew, having done all that he had planned for the day, sat down on the porch to rest and admire nature. Matthew was a tall, broad-shouldered man, with strong arms, and he was intelligent as well. His hair was a little gray by the time he was 45, but this did not spoil him at all, on the contrary, it suited him and gave him an imposing appearance. He was a handsome man, with a strong chin and a straight nose. His lips were a little thin, but they did not spoil the general portrait. He knew well what women liked and he used it, but not often, it was just his masculine nature that sometimes won out. But Matthew didn't feel like a winner. But when he married, he considered his wife to be the most important and the only person in his life. His Saren. She was beautiful and smart at the same time. And that was very surprising. People used to say, if you want to marry a smart and beautiful woman, you have to marry twice. But he was lucky. Saren had a law degree. Lawyers shouldn't be so pretty, you distract clients from the main issue they came to you with, Matthew always said. She laughed at such compliments, making no secret that she liked them. Right after graduating from university, she was hired by a very prestigious firm. Of course, it was not without connections, but that case was a bit different. She was smart and had all the leadership qualities. In the eyes of coworkers and supervisors, she was associated as a positive image. When talking to people, she chose her words carefully, understanding that they were the most powerful tool of influence. Being a good psychologist by birth, she did everything she could to get good gossip about her around the office. It turns out that well-thought-out rumors can work wonders. And in this case, you can make a brilliant career much easier. You just need to surround yourself with a halo of mystery, and well-thought-out gossip will bring success. Saren understood this very well and did everything masterfully. In 6 months she was already a leading specialist, and in another 6 months she was head of the legal department. She was a strict but fair boss. Some people loved her, but others hated. But no one was indifferent. The main thing was that the bosses were satisfied with her. Suddenly it started raining, pulling Matthew from his memories. The man jumped up, barely making it inside in time to keep from getting wet. Time passed, and September was coming to an end. There were fewer and fewer country house owners every day. They packed their bags, closed their houses and left for the city. The weather was getting worse, it was cold at night and in the morning one did not want to part with a warm blanket. But hot tea and a morning jog changed the situation radically. Matthew couldn't get the furnace fixed. He'd never seen anything like it before. When he lived with the homeless, it was much simpler. They made a fire in the dilapidated house and kept warm there until the wind blowing through the broken windows froze them all to death. Ava couldn't stop thinking about Matthew's wintering either. She decided to talk to Uncle John. He lived in the cottage community on the next street. He had once laid out this stove. Maybe he could help. Deciding not to put it off, she went straight to him the next day. The elderly man immediately agreed to inspect the stove, and together with Ava they went into the house. It turned out that the chimney was just clogged. After cleaning everything and checking the draft, he stoked the stove himself and gave a satisfied chuckle. Now, that's another thing. Of course, it is time to heat the house, it is so cold. And the stove will serve you for another 100 years, the craftsman has done a good job, and he smiled and made a meaningful expression and proudly turned up his nose. Half an hour later, the house was warm, and Matthew and Ava began to prepare dinner. Over the meal she asked him about wintering. "It's going to be cold here, Matthew," she said, putting a salad on his plate, "but you can move into my apartment. I buried my husband. My son's all grown up, lives in another city. There's plenty of room. How about you?" And she looked at the man with a questioning eyebrow. But he shook his head negatively. "I feel bad, Ava. I'll explain why. Living here, I am useful to you. This is how I pay you back for the good you do for me. And in the city I sit on your neck? You might say you, Ava, have brought me back to life. I got my strength back. My head is full of ideas. I am only 45. I have to move on. Well, that's wonderful, smiled Ava, so you won't be sitting on my neck, but you'll put your ideas into action. You'll find a job, stay with me temporarily, and when you have money, you'll rent or buy your own place. The woman could not allow the thought that they would soon part and maybe never meet each other again. And if you want, I'll give you a job. We need people. Thank you for your concern, but I'm a creative person, he shook his head negatively again. Maybe you should contact your friends, Ava said, wanting not to give up. That would be wonderful, smiled Matthew. But Ava saw that his gaze grew sad, but as soon as I lost my high office, my connections, and my earnings, I lost all my friends. It's now that I realize I probably never had any. You might think that I gave up and became a bum at once. No, Ava, I held on for almost a year and a half. However, it was these very friends who made every effort to get me to where you pulled me from and didn't let me disappear. On the one hand she felt sorry for him, but on the other Ava suddenly realized that she was imposing herself on him. It was as if she was trying desperately to jump into the last wagon. Yes, she liked him, and the woman couldn't deny it. She had made plans for their future together, but apparently his plans were quite different. She felt very ashamed of herself for trying so desperately to have him stay with her. The woman immediately went home. Where are you going? It's almost night, began to worry Matthew. Maybe I've offended you in some way? I didn't mean to, Ava, I'm sorry. That's all right, she said in a calm voice, I'll call a cab now, and it will get me there quickly. You, Matthew, don't bother. Live as long as you need, once you find lodging, leave the key in the place I showed you. And she started dialing the dispatcher's number. The cab waited in silence. When the sound of a car pulling up to the house was heard, Matthew asked, You're not coming here again until spring? No, I guess, Ava shrugged as indifferently as possible. The work on the property is finished, the harvest is long over. And there's a lot to do at home, you know. You rest, Matthew. I won't bore you, she took her bag and hurried to the front door. Why are you like this, Ava? I'm very good to you. Even too well. That's not necessary, the woman interrupted him, just fine will suffice. You and I have different plans for the future. You don't need to see me off either, he said, seeing that the man had grabbed a sweater. On the street, the cab driver honked his horn every 5 seconds, hurrying the slow passengers. Come, Ava, Matthew said. Goodbye. I'll look forward to seeing you. I'll think about it, the woman replied and walked out. The cab was taking her farther and farther away from this man, with whom in her dreams she connected her future. And for nothing. He had very different plans, ambitious. He wanted to get back everything he had lost, or that had been taken from him. And living with her in a 2-room apartment was not his level. She had no right to decide for him. He's homeless, but he's not stupid. Maybe he has a family and wants to go back to his folks. Then why didn't they look for him and help him? He never said anything about himself. Maybe, if she'd known more about him, she wouldn't have made those plans. Now she felt sorry for herself. She was building her womanhood with a man she liked as a bum, and she must have fallen in love when she saw him in all his glory, because it was impossible not to fall in love with him. Men like that are always a success. Women go after them, seeing great potential in them. She could not sleep. Even toward morning, her eyes seemed to be closing and sleep was about to come to her, but no. She got up at 6 a.m. and went to the kitchen for coffee. Matthew, too, lay awake all night with his eyes open and could not fall asleep. He liked this woman, but if he started a fight to get back what was his, he would put her in danger. And she had nothing to do with it. But if he didn't fix what had happened last night now, they might break up and never meet again. And he had no desire to lose her. Barely waiting until 9 a.m., he decided to go to John, who was repairing their furnace, to call Ava from him. He didn't know anyone else here anyway. Quickly throwing on a light jacket, Matthew headed for the neighbors. But when he reached the front door, he felt so sick that he slipped quietly to the ground and passed out. John was just then going to Ava's house to check on the furnace. When he came outside and saw Matthew lying there, the older man grinned. "But you wouldn't even know he was using," John muttered. "He seemed so decent." Bad luck for Ava. James was a good man. That's what they say about a good man. This one, the man sighed and leaned toward Matthew, trying to feel for a pulse. Thank God he's alive. He dialed the number of the ambulance and reported what had happened. The ambulance drove for quite a long time, and during that time Matthew regained consciousness and whispered faintly, "Stomach. I feel really bad, let Ava know." Then he passed out again. Then John began to worry. The ambulance took a treacherously long time to arrive. Finally, the doctors took Matthew away after 40 minutes, and John hurried to his wife. He needed her to report everything to Ava. The wife didn't hesitate. "Ava, you're Matthew," she began hurriedly, but Ava interrupted her abruptly. "He's not mine. He's just an acquaintance." "Wait a minute. Your friend is just in the hospital. He got sick. Fell down by the front door. John called an ambulance. So Matthew's in the hospital. They said they'd take him to the on-call room. I wasn't quite sure where. He told me to call you, so I'm calling you. And John went over to your house to make sure everything was off. He locked the door. He said he put the key under the carpet. Don't worry about that." "Thank you," Ava said. "And when did that happen?" "Recently. But we don't know how long he was lying there. The ambulance was almost an hour away. And from the moment they took him away, about 15 minutes had passed." "I got it, thanks, I'll find him," Ava thanked her concerned neighbors and hung up. She was confused. Her hands were trembling and her lips were whispering, "God, I wish everything was okay." "You hang in there, Matthew, everything will be all right." After calming down a bit, she dialed the number of the information desk and found out which hospital was on duty today. Then she called a cab. Half an hour later, she was already standing at the entrance to the institution. During the time it took her to get there, the woman thought about everything: the worst diagnoses, how much money she might need, where she could get it if her savings were suddenly insufficient. He must be saved at any cost, because good people need help. And who will help him but her, Ava? "A man was admitted to you an hour ago. May I ask, what had happened to him?" she asked the receptionist, out of breath. "Who are you to him?" the receptionist asked without even looking at Ava. "Wife," Ava lied without the slightest embarrassment. "Wife," the receptionist repeated after her and looked up at her. "Wife, then, and doesn't know where her husband is or what's wrong with him." "I wasn't at home. A neighbor called the ambulance. They said they would take me to the on-call hospital. What's so criminal about it? I don't understand." Ava was getting angry. But the girl at the front desk was already flipping through the magazine. After reviewing the admission lists, she answered several times. "There is no such man, he's not registered." "How many on-call hospitals can there be?" "Maybe they took him to another one," Ava asked. "There's only one hospital on duty," the nurse said, and then added, "Woman, we're not an information desk here. I told you he didn't come in. Look somewhere else. I have work to do." Ava turned around and was about to leave, but suddenly she was called out. "Woman, wait. An hour ago, you say, came in? There was one. But he's listed as John Doe. Unconscious himself. No ID on him." "Yes, yes." Ava almost shouted with joy, "That's my Matthew. It's beautiful. It's just that the paperwork burned in the fire. It's in the process of being restored," Ava marveled to herself. How long ago had she learned to lie so skillfully? "Beautiful or not, I don't know. You know how many of them come in here. But you have to go to room 25, down the corridor to the end and to the left. That's where you can ask everything." Ava thanked the woman and walked at a brisk pace, barely keeping herself from running, in the right direction. There was another nurse sitting in the office. After listening to her, she informed her that the undocumented patient was being operated on. We have to wait until the operation is over, and then the doctor will tell us everything. The doctor came after 3 hours of agonizing waiting. Why are you looking after your husband so poorly? The doctor looked reproachfully at Ava, recognizing who stood before him. The disease is severely neglected. A stomach ulcer is very serious. He was in a terrible condition. Probably only the homeless are worse. You're right about everything, doctor. Yes, he doesn't listen to me, he refuses treatment. I thought it would go away on its own. And you see how it turned out, she shrugged. So what to do, doctor? Will he live? Ava looked at the doctor with such hope that he took pity and smiled despite his tired appearance. He took her hand and said more gently, "Don't worry so much. It's all done now. The surgery was a success. Now all you have to do is rehabilitate and recover. I don't think there will be any complications." How old is your husband? 45, Ava whispered, wiping away her tears. Well, 45, the doctor stretched out, your husband is still full of strength. A young body. He'll do fine, of course. And with a wife like that. Your Matthew will be all right. You can't see him now, of course, the doctor anticipated Ava's question, come back in a couple of days. I'll tell them to give you a pass, and then you can see your spouse. For now, go home, don't worry about anything. Doctor, when he comes to his senses, tell him Ava's wife says hello. That's what you say. By all means, wife Ava. Going back from the hospital, she felt more relaxed. At home, the woman read all the articles on the internet and learned everything about the recovery of patients diagnosed with peptic ulcers, what they were fed, what kind of food was needed, even made a sample menu. 2 days later, Ava was on her way to the hospital, having fully studied both the diet and the care of such patients. She was issued a pass, as promised, and, holding her breath, she knocked on the room. Matthew was lying by the window. His eyes were closed and the blanket was pulled up to his chin. She didn't wake him up, but just sat next to him on a chair and watched him. How handsome he is after all, the woman thought, smiling. She thought he had an addition of gray hair, but it didn't spoil him in the slightest. On the contrary, even. She was so engrossed in staring that she didn't even notice when Matthew opened his eyes and looked at her, smiling. Hello, wife Anna. Oh, I'm sorry, Matthew, they just wouldn't have let me in otherwise. She wanted to say something else to justify herself, but he gestured for her to shut up. I brought you something to eat. At this time, the doctor came into the room. Oh, wife Anna, hello. You see, your husband is alive, and you've been crying. Everything will be all right. Then turning to Matthew, he said, and you should listen to your wife. She told us that you don't like to be treated and you don't listen to her. And it's bad to let yourself go so badly at your age. Shame. She was worried about you. Ava sat there all red. She was running a fever, so she took a newspaper she could find and began to wrap it around herself. The doctor, after examining Matthew, said she needed a bandage and went to the other patients. Matthew, I'm sorry. If I hadn't said all that, they wouldn't have let me in. And now I have an official pass. You are now officially my wife, the man raised his eyebrows in surprise. Shame. She married you herself. Where did you see that? Why, I like it, said Matthew with a little smile. He took her hand, and the two of them felt good together. You know, Ava, I'm hungry. What smells so good coming out of your bag? So let's eat. It's all clean here. Here's some rosehip tea. You can eat, too, Ava said. You have to eat 6 or 7 times. A little at a time. I will come to you every day after work. It's good that the clinic is not far from our office. Did you hear what the doctor said? You have to listen to me. So after you're discharged you'll come to my place? She looked at his reaction and then added, no, if you want to, of course. You can also take me to the cottage. I don't want to be where you aren't anymore, Matthew said, taking a serious look. We need to talk to you. I have a lot to tell you. And if you want to stay with me after that, we'll never be apart again." He took her hand and kissed it. "I'm going to go, Matthew, or you're about to have a bandage." She bent down to kiss his cheek, but he unexpectedly set his lips. "Here's our first kiss, wife Anna," the man smiled. "You're making me blush," Ava muttered, and she was embarrassed. "It suits you. You look beautiful." She walked out of the hospital like she was on a date. Emotions raged inside her. He liked her. And he had long since settled in her heart. We must get his son's room ready for him. Suddenly she slowed her step and said to herself, "Oh, maybe he'll sleep in the bedroom, too." Then when she saw her bus, she waved her hands and ran to the bus stop. While Matthew was in the hospital, Ava had his health insurance reinstated, otherwise money was required for treatment. It turned out it wasn't hard at all. She took the application to have the passport reinstated. It was more complicated and not as fast as the policy, but the process was set in motion. Matthew's second week in the hospital was coming to an end. His stitches were healing. He wasn't feeling bad. There was some weakness. When he and Anya walked down the corridor, he often rested, but that was nothing. His strength would be restored, his spirits would rise, he would get his papers, and their life would play with new colors. And there's a cab outside the hospital. Matthew, packed, is waiting for her. Ava stops by the doctor to thank him. "May I?" She knocked, peeking into the office. "Oh, wife Anna, come in, of course. We're leaving. I want to thank you again and give you a can of good coffee. Your work is difficult, nerve-wracking, sometimes sleepless. Coffee is good for you. All the best and thank you very much." "Thank you, too. Don't come to us again," the man smiled as he accepted the gift. "We'll definitely try." The taxi took them home in 15 minutes. "Here we are home," Ava smiled. "No one's throwing us a homecoming party, of course. No flowers, no orchestra. But there's a lot of spectators. They're studying the new occupant of our friendly home." "Am I new?" "Here's my place." Matthew nodded toward the dumpster. "Everything is in its place." "Why would you bring it up?" She looked at her newfound husband in surprise. "You don't look like a bum." "But I won't tell anyone where I found such a handsome man. Let them wonder." Sophie, Ava's neighbor, was already waiting for them in the stairwell. "Hello, Ava," she said, poorly hiding her curiosity. "Sophie, I saw you this morning and we got on the bus together," Ava smiled. "I forgot. You know, I'll come to you for salt." "Sophie, at least let us undress, let us breathe, and then, if you don't change your mind, come in. I'll give you a packet of salt and some matches to last, but I don't think you need salt. Meet Matthew at my place, so you'll know and tell everybody." "And as what?" Sophie clarified, oblivious of the salt. "Husband. Calm down. Any other questions?" Sophie shook her head and went to her room. Half an hour later, the whole house knew that Ava was no longer a widow, but a married woman. "Girls, the man is handsome. Where does she find them? James was good, and this one is even better." "Well, that's good. She's beautiful, she cooks well. Why should she be alone if men immediately fall in love when they look at her?" said one of the interviewees. "God, I wish I could find a man so I wouldn't have to spend my evenings alone," Sophie said with a sigh. No one recognized the handsome, gray-haired man as a dirty, hungry homeless man who was always sitting by the garbage dump in the company of others like him, whom Jessica, the building supervisor, had chased away. A week passed. Ava and Matthew talked a lot, barely went outside, but they never got to the main conversation. Ava delayed the moment, knowing that it would not be easy for Matthew. And that meant more nerves and stress from the hard memories. After a week, he did sit her down across from him and said, "Ava, I can see that you are delaying the start of a frank conversation. But it will happen anyway. You need to know who you are living with and who you want to tie your life to. It wouldn't be fair to keep you in the dark and take advantage of your kindness. I realize that I owe everything to you for not disappearing on the street and for staying alive and now being warm and clean, with a gorgeous woman. Oh, that's a long introduction, Matthew, Ava grimaced. When does the main part start? You don't want to listen to compliments. I don't understand, aren't you used to it, or are you used to it already? Weaned, Matthew. We had a good life with James, and I longed for him very much. I used to roar alone in the apartment, but then I gradually got used to being alone. I even started to like it. All right, today's your day. I'm ready to listen to you. Tell me. I'll start from afar, Ava, from the very beginning, so that you can get a complete picture of me. This story started back in Construction University, when 3 friends had the idea of building their own business. We had known each other for a long time and well enough to decide on such a venture. But it had to be postponed for an indefinite period, if only because there was neither a clear idea, nor a clear understanding of why it was necessary. Time was also of the essence. We were in our 4th year at university and we wanted to go out, to the clubs, to girls. We hadn't matured then, but the dream was deep in our heads and we kept coming back to it. Never start a business with friends, my genius father told me. Business is not fun, it's complicated. And sometimes it's also scary. Especially when you have to deal with bureaucracy and criminality. And better to fully understand the situation, work under someone else's guidance, gain experience. And then you can go free sailing. We never listen to our parents. We want to make our own mistakes. That would be experience. After graduation, we still decided to pursue our dream and sketched out a business plan. When I showed it to my father, he asked, "Did you schedule each of you out of the project?" At the time I was surprised, because this was our common project and we were not going to give it up. My father laughed at the time and then became serious and said, "When one decides to start a business with friends, one must know that friendship and business are not compatible. When a person decides to start a business with friends, he should know that friendship and business, things are difficult to combine, so the first thing you should do, to schedule each of you out of the project. You'll be healthier, too. Once difficulties begin, everyone will blame the other, but not themselves for the mistakes and failures. Listen to me, son, spell it out. Business partners rarely have the same opinions, so conflicts are inevitable. But as in any business, truth is born in argument. It's the same in business, they're necessary because they help create something worthwhile. I'll tell you right away, Ava, we didn't understand anything and didn't really know anything. But each of us had the kind of ambition that showed that anyone could be a CEO. We did start our own business, we took out the paperwork, rented an office, and bought office equipment. Things got going, and we were happy. The euphoria took over us completely. We believed that when we are together, we are the power. At first everything was cool, we dreamed of riches, fancy cars, and vacations on islands. But that was in the beginning. And then I realized how right my father was at the time. We were no longer having much fun together, because all the work in the office was a hard routine, totally uncreative and uninteresting. Accounting, legal support, suppliers and employees, cleaners, and a million other issues. Then it turned out that we had radically different opinions on most issues, and we could not make a final decision. And if someone's decision was made, it was to the detriment of the other. Grudges began to appear. Only now I realized, when we were at university, we were equals. And in business there was a lot to do. We had to look for customers and performers. But one of us hung around all day. Ethan and I did quite well without him. There were resentments again, misunderstandings, miscommunications. We were at a dead end. Matthew sighed heavily and leaned back in his chair, shutting his eyes. Matthew, you're tired, you look pale. Not good memories, huh? Ava fretted. The man just nodded his head and said, I'm going to go lie down for a while. You know, that's probably enough for today. Let's do the rest tomorrow, Ava said sternly. He wanted to object, but she reminded him of the doctor's advice, you must obey your wife, and he nodded again, smiled, and went into the bedroom. The next day, after breakfast, Matthew decided to continue his story. No matter how hard Ava tried to distract him from the difficult memories, he was not persuaded. This time they were seated on the loggia, with the transom slightly open for the fresh autumn air. The woman put a kettle and cups on a small table, fresh sweet cakes. She covered Matthew with a blanket and prepared to listen. She smiled and, reaching out to him, shook his hand, thus trying to support him. I settled on one hanging around somewhere all day, and Ethan and I got along just fine without him. That's how 6 months went by. He was getting a paycheck, doing practically nothing. Then we decided to specifically assign a block of responsibilities to each of them, for which they had to report once a week at the planning meeting. We could not assign these responsibilities. Bill, the third one, seemed to be assigned the most difficult and failed sections. I eventually got tired of it. I practically yelled at him at the time, "You choose what you specifically want to do in the company and what you have to report on." I practically shouted at him. Of course, he didn't like this, and he wished to withdraw from the business, taking all the capital he had invested. Bill understood that everything would fall apart if he took his money out. He liked to dictate his terms. Then I said, "Let's look at our contract, the clause that says how anyone can get out of the project." One night Ethan and I decided that we would buy Bill out of his share and part ways. That meant staying friends. Now, when it comes to money, it's hard to part as good friends without hard feelings. Everyone believes that he has invested more effort and money than others, and if the money can still somehow be counted, the amount of nerves is much harder to calculate. It turned into a nightmare that lasted for months. And the whole time Bill was getting paid without doing anything. I suggested at the time that we deduct the money from what we owed him for getting out of the case. He was yelling and calling us names, but he agreed, because even the richest owner wouldn't pay money for nothing, let alone us. We counted every penny, who owed more to whom, whose slip-ups resulted in fines, who made mistakes, and where. How much money was lost because of that mistake? Not a trace of the good friendships was left. I kept thinking back to my father, how right he had been to warn me about the consequences. Still, we said goodbye to Bill as a partner. And, unfortunately, as a friend. And with Ethan, things began to get better. The company began to develop, customers appeared. At first there weren't many, but then we had a high demand for projects. We made good money and could afford to buy a prestigious car. I bought myself a nice apartment at that time and began to live separately from my parents. Ethan, meanwhile, decided to get married, believing that he was on his feet and it was time to start a family. We rented another, more comfortable office. We had some solid customers coming to see us, and we had to look the part. At one of the meetings I saw a gorgeous woman. She worked as a lawyer for a company that was our competitor Enterprise. That was the name of their firm. It was much bigger than ours and had been on the market 5 years earlier. But we were young, we were looking for orders, traveling around, offering our services. And it was paying off. "Matthew, why don't we go into the room?" "It's getting chilly," Ava suggested solicitously. He was reliving all the emotions of his friends, company, and betrayal. "Yes, let's continue in the room." "Ava, I think I have a fever." "Don't scare me, why would you have a fever?" She tried her forehead and calmed down. "You don't have a fever. It's okay." "All right," Matthew said and continued, so Ethan and I went on with our work. We split up the duties. I was better at working with people, convincing them, proving my point of view, so I did the customers. Ethan was better at supervision. He was strict with the workers, demanded up to and including firing them. And since our salaries were good, everyone held on to their jobs. After Bill left, we learned from our bitter experience. We formalized everything legally and now it was documented who invested how much in the company. Now we had peace of mind, but there were still advantages to working with friends. I trusted Ethan completely as my companion. It didn't happen right away, of course, but the business presented many opportunities to test this. As I said, at one meeting I met a beautiful woman, the head of the legal department of a rival company. She was scheduled to speak at the time. If someone had asked me at the time what she was talking about, I would not have answered because I was staring at her with my eyes wide open. And I wasn't the only one. Since it was mostly men in the audience, everyone was fascinated by her. How could I have thought that after a while, she would be my wife? Then, when I started making inquiries, looking for information on the internet, I learned a lot about her. Saren, she was beautiful and smart. A rare combination. She was a top-class lawyer who loved her job, and she did it masterfully. She never lost a case for her company. She was hired by a lot of companies, but she was loyal to this firm. But she left her abruptly. As it turned out, she had an affair with the financial director, and it was on the way to the wedding. The general director's daughter was also in love with him. The man chose a more lucrative option. She quit her job and posted a post on Twitter saying she was looking for work. After talking to Ethan, we decided to hire her for the same position she had at her previous company. I wrote to her, invited her to the interview, having prepared myself on a piece of paper in advance the questions I would ask her. I waited for her and kept looking at my watch. Minute by minute she knocked on the door. I remember that I asked her questions, but I won't say what she answered. I kept saying afterwards that lawyers shouldn't be so pretty, that she was distracting clients from the main issue they were coming to her with. She laughed at such compliments, making no secret that she liked them. We started spending a lot of time together. A month later I proposed to her, which she very culturally declined. But 6 months later she reminded me about it. If you still want to marry me, I agree. I was shocked at her refusal at the time, but now I'm shocked at her acceptance. But she made me a condition that the wedding be on November 12th. At first I tried to make my own arrangements at the marriage registry office, but they were all booked up for that day. Then Ethan helped me. His wife had a good friend who worked there and was able to arrange for us to be married on that date. Sometime later I found out why she wanted to do it at that time. Her ex-boyfriend was getting married to the boss's daughter at the time. Apparently, she wanted to show me that she wasn't suffering too much and was getting married, too. But it wasn't until later that I realized she was just using me in her game. I was a good match for her. She, as I understand it, was not ashamed to show me to the world in the person of her failed fiancé. So that he could see what he had lost. I was as good as he was, and Saren was still in her position. That's how my family life with Saren began. After a month, I realized that she didn't love me at all. No, in public everything was decent, we were considered an ideal couple. And my wife seemed to treat me well. But somehow everything was strained, there was not that warmth, sincerity, passion that can be found in a young married couple. We didn't fight, but we didn't have those family nights that I dreamed of when I was single. Saren's work was excellent. She fired some of the lawyers as unfit. They were replaced by real professionals. A year went by like that. Business in the company was going well, and we could afford to go on vacation for a couple of weeks. We had our first fight on vacation. It seemed to me that she was misbehaving, smiling at the men's obscene jokes. When I wanted to just talk to them so that they would treat the woman with respect, she told me that she saw nothing special in what they were saying and was used to male attention. She didn't want the serial jealousy scenes. It was as if she was provoking me on purpose, showing me what success she had with the male population. I knew that. It was impossible to walk past a woman like that and not look back. When I returned from vacation, I somehow started talking about children with Saren. You and I are on solid ground and can afford to have a child or even two. If the apartment isn't big enough for a big family, we'll build a house, I said. But Saren overreacted, accusing me of wanting to shut her out of the house to turn her into a fat cow and a housewife. She screamed so much that I left the house so I wouldn't have to hear it all. And without me she would have calmed down quicker. As I returned home, I saw that there were no lights in the windows. So, Saren had already gone to bed. As quietly as possible, so as not to disturb her, I entered the apartment. My wife was awake and talking on the phone to someone. From scraps of phrases that consisted of, "I'll try, but not so fast. Don't rush me. You want too much." I didn't understand anything at the time. When she heard me coming up, she immediately shut down. So there are secrets from me, I thought. At the time, she was taking every suggestion I made to her with a wave of the tongue. Her reaction stunned me, and one day, when I couldn't stand it, I talked about divorce. You and I don't have a family, and apparently we won't have one anymore. There's a very understandable reason for that: you don't love me. That's why the scandals, the unwillingness to have children. I see no point in torturing each other further. I could tell from her reaction that this was clearly not part of her plan. She hadn't expected to hear me say that. Her eyes flickered. She rubbed her hands unnaturally and walked nervously around the room. Then she suggested that we live apart for a while. In the morning, she packed up some of her things and left for her apartment. I missed her very much at that time. I tried not to bother her at work and did not approach her. She only waved as she passed by my office to her department. So a month went by, another month. She never came back. The third was coming to an end. One morning she came into my office. "Do you miss me?" she asked in a kind of swagger that I hated. "I miss you very much," I answered truthfully, though. "I missed you, too, and I'm coming home tonight." "For how long?" I asked then. "That will depend on you," Saren replied cryptically. About 6 months after she returned, I received explicit photos in my mail showing my wife and her former CFO. You could tell by the date that while she was not with me, she was with him. I decided not to tell her anything yet. She didn't know that I knew all about her affairs. It was the 3rd year of our life together. It was the 3rd year of our life together. I was now just beginning to realize how my company was starting to lose momentum. What a fool I was. After all, the deception was obvious, and I didn't notice it. One day, Ethan came into my office and told me that there was information about a tender on the city's website. The bidders have to register and submit their services to build a neighborhood with all the infrastructure. The money is enormous, and we will provide people with jobs for 2 years. We are excited about the idea. It would be especially good for children to live there. We ourselves were in love with our project. At the appointed time, we came to the hall to present our designs. We were third. When I started to tell about our ideas, the chairman of the committee stopped me and said that this project was presented yesterday by Enterprise and they were the favorites, because the project is so well thought out that hardly anyone else would have a better one. I felt bad at the time. A month and a half of my life was spent, money was paid to the developer, and in the end we were accused of plagiarism. Someone had leaked information about our project and reduced our efforts to zero. But who? Who is working as a rat in our company? I looked at Ethan, but he didn't hide his eyes, which had even more surprise in them than mine. Who then? I hadn't even thought of Saren, and she was very interested in our work. I fell out of my life for 2 weeks. A sore throat came out of nowhere, and my temperature was off the charts. I couldn't speak or swallow. The condition was terrible. The ambulance came a couple of times. They gave me some injections, which made me feel better. I felt bad, not even because a project was stolen from us and we were deprived of a huge amount of money, but from the fact that it was done by someone of my own, who works in the company. How can you work after that if you can't trust people? A week later, I came to my senses. My throat stopped hurting, and my temperature became normal as suddenly as it had risen. I already wanted to go to work, but I had no energy at all. At that time, Saren asked me to sign a general power of attorney for her. I didn't see the need for it. Ethan was at work. He came by to tell me how things were going. My wife was very upset with me at the time, saying, "How can you live with you if you don't trust me? What's that got to do with mistrust? Why do you need a general power of attorney when Ethan performs all the duties and has the power to sign? Why do you need it?" I asked. "All right," Matthew said and continued, "so Ethan and I went on with our work. We split up the duties. I was better at working with people, convincing them, proving my point of view, so I did the customers. Ethan was better at supervision. He was strict with the workers, demanded up to and including firing them. And since our salaries were good, everyone held on to their jobs. After Bill left, we learned from our bitter experience. We formalized everything legally, and now it was documented who invested how much in the company. Now we had peace of mind, but there were still advantages to working with friends. I trusted Ethan completely as my companion. It didn't happen right away, of course, but the business presented many opportunities to test this. As I said, at one meeting I met a beautiful woman, the head of the legal department of a rival company. She was scheduled to speak at the time. If someone had asked me at the time what she was talking about, I would not have answered because I was staring at her with my eyes wide open. And I wasn't the only one. Since it was mostly men in the audience, everyone was fascinated by her. How could I have thought that after a while, she would be my wife? Then, when I started making inquiries, looking for information on the internet, I learned a lot about her. Saren, she was beautiful and smart. A rare combination. She was a top-class lawyer who loved her job, and she did it masterfully. She never lost a case for her company. She was hired by a lot of companies, but she was loyal to this firm. But she left her abruptly. As it turned out, she had an affair with the financial director, and it was on the way to the wedding. The general director's daughter was also in love with him. The man chose a more lucrative option. She quit her job and posted a post on Twitter saying she was looking for work. After talking to Ethan, we decided to hire her for the same position she had at her previous company. I wrote to her, invited her to the interview, having prepared myself on a piece of paper in advance the questions I would ask her. I waited for her and kept looking at my watch. Minute by minute she knocked on the door. I remember that I asked her questions, but I won't say what she answered. I kept saying afterwards that lawyers shouldn't be so pretty, that she was distracting clients from the main issue they were coming to her with. She laughed at such compliments, making no secret that she liked them. We started spending a lot of time together. A month later I proposed to her, which she very culturally declined. But 6 months later she reminded me about it. If you still want to marry me, I agree. I was shocked at her refusal at the time, but now I'm shocked at her acceptance. But she made me a condition that the wedding be on November 12th. At first I tried to make my own arrangements at the marriage registry office, but they were all booked up for that day. Then Ethan helped me. His wife had a good friend who worked there and was able to arrange for us to be married on that date. Sometime later I found out why she wanted to do it at that time. Her ex-boyfriend was getting married to the boss's daughter at the time. Apparently, she wanted to show me that she wasn't suffering too much and was getting married, too. But it wasn't until later that I realized she was just using me in her game. I was a good match for her. She, as I understand it, was not ashamed to show me to the world in the person of her failed fiancé. So that he could see what he had lost. I was as good as he was, and Saren was still in her position. That's how my family life with Saren began. After a month, I realized that she didn't love me at all. No, in public everything was decent, we were considered an ideal couple. And my wife seemed to treat me well. But somehow everything was strained. There was not that warmth, sincerity, passion that can be found in a young married couple. We didn't fight, but we didn't have those family nights that I dreamed of when I was single. Saren's work was excellent. She fired some of the lawyers as unfit. They were replaced by real professionals. A year went by like that. Business in the company was going well, and we could afford to go on vacation for a couple of weeks. We had our first fight on vacation. It seemed to me that she was misbehaving, smiling at the men's obscene jokes. When I wanted to just talk to them so that they would treat the woman with respect, she told me that she saw nothing special in what they were saying and was used to male attention. She didn't want the serial jealousy scenes. It was as if she was provoking me on purpose, showing me what success she had with the male population. I knew that. It was impossible to walk past a woman like that and not look back. When I returned from vacation, I somehow started talking about children with Saren. You and I are on solid ground and can afford to have a child or even two. If the apartment isn't big enough for a big family, we'll build a house, I said. But Saren overreacted, accusing me of wanting to shut her out of the house to turn her into a fat cow and a housewife. She screamed so much that I left the house so I wouldn't have to hear it all. And without me, she would have calmed down quicker. As I returned home, I saw that there were no lights in the windows. So, Saren had already gone to bed. As quietly as possible, so as not to disturb her, I entered the apartment. My wife was awake and talking on the phone to someone. From scraps of phrases that consisted of, "I'll try, but not so fast. Don't rush me. You want too much." I didn't understand anything at the time. When she heard me coming up, she immediately shut down. So there are secrets from me, I thought. At the time, she was taking every suggestion I made to her with a wave of the tongue. Her reaction stunned me, and one day, when I couldn't stand it, I talked about divorce. "You and I don't have a family, and apparently we won't have one anymore. There's a very understandable reason for that: you don't love me. That's why the scandals, the unwillingness to have children. I see no point in torturing each other further." I could tell from her reaction that this was clearly not part of her plan. She hadn't expected to hear me say that. Her eyes flickered. She rubbed her hands unnaturally and walked nervously around the room. Then she suggested that we live apart for a while. In the morning, she packed up some of her things and left for her apartment. I missed her very much at that time. I tried not to bother her at work and did not approach her. She only waved as she passed by my office to her department. So a month went by, another month. She never came back. The third was coming to an end. One morning she came into my office. "Do you miss me?" she asked in a kind of swagger that I hated. "I miss you very much," I answered truthfully, though. "I missed you, too, and I'm coming home tonight." "For how long?" I asked then. "That will depend on you," Saren replied cryptically. About 6 months after she returned, I received explicit photos in my mail showing my wife and her former CFO. You could tell by the date that while she was not with me, she was with him. I decided not to tell her anything yet. She didn't know that I knew all about her affairs. It was the 3rd year of our life together. It was the 3rd year of our life together. I was now just beginning to realize how my company was starting to lose momentum. What a fool I was. After all, the deception was obvious, and I didn't notice it. One day, Ethan came into my office and told me that there was information about a tender on the city's website. The bidders have to register and submit their services to build a neighborhood with all the infrastructure. The money is enormous, and we will provide people with jobs for 2 years. We are excited about the idea. It would be especially good for children to live there. We ourselves were in love with our project. At the appointed time, we came to the hall to present our designs. We were third. When I started to tell about our ideas, the chairman of the committee stopped me and said that this project was presented yesterday by Enterprise and they were the favorites, because the project is so well thought out that hardly anyone else would have a better one. I felt bad at the time. A month and a half of my life was spent, money was paid to the developer, and in the end we were accused of plagiarism. Someone had leaked information about our project and reduced our efforts to zero. But who? Who is working as a rat in our company? I looked at Ethan, but he didn't hide his eyes, which had even more surprise in them than mine. Who then? I hadn't even thought of Saren, and she was very interested in our work. I fell out of my life for 2 weeks. A sore throat came out of nowhere, and my temperature was off the charts. I couldn't speak or swallow. The condition was terrible. The ambulance came a couple of times. They gave me some injections, which made me feel better. I felt bad, not even because a project was stolen from us and we were deprived of a huge amount of money, but from the fact that it was done by someone of my own, who works in the company. How can you work after that if you can't trust people? A week later, I came to my senses. My throat stopped hurting, and my temperature became normal as suddenly as it had risen. I already wanted to go to work, but I had no energy at all. At that time, Saren asked me to sign a general power of attorney for her. I didn't see the need for it. Ethan was at work, he came by to tell me how things were going. My wife was very upset with me at the time, saying, "How can you live with you if you don't trust me? What's that got to do with mistrust? Why do you need a general power of attorney when Ethan performs all the duties and has the power to sign? Why do you need it?" I asked. Matthew's staff liked it. It was mostly young people. Creative guys who had ideas that poured out all the time. When he got his first paycheck, he bought groceries, a nice bottle of wine, and put the rest of the money on the table for Ava. "No, I'm not comfortable. I won't take it. Come on," he brought me my paycheck, and she laughed so loudly and infectiously that he joined her, too. From that day on, they began to live as husband and wife in the full sense of the word. It was not passion. It was a love that was conscious and grateful. It was a love where the partner is respected and cared for. This is the kind of love that is the strongest and never goes away. This marriage wasn't about status or because it was time. Last chance. No. Ava was too smart for that. By and large, she had everything, a job, creative fulfillment, and enough income to support herself and pay her rent. She never felt lonely. She lived happily ever after, but she had everything in her life but him, and she wanted to be with this man. There was both spiritual and intellectual intimacy between them. That's the difference between a young girl and a 40-year-old woman. A young woman falls in love first and then thinks about it. The 40-year-old thinks for a long, long time and then suddenly lets herself fall in love. That's the one about Ava. They found each other's soul mates. They were good together. They were happy. Matthew courted her so well, she was uncomfortable. He liked to work, and afterwards he liked to hurry home, where they were waiting for him. A year went by like that. Noticing a smart worker, he was promoted to deputy department head. This not only lifted him up in his own eyes. The salary was almost double. So he decided to surprise his Ava. The day he asked to go to her country house was the day they met. It was the same day in the evening he presented her with a ring and asked her to become his wife officially. Ava cried softly on his shoulder, and he felt like a hero capable of making the woman he loved happy. "You deserve better, my dear, and I will surely make you happy. I'm already happy. I don't need anything else, believe me." But there was a change waiting for them that they could not have dreamed of. Apparently, they came to the very edge of a black streak, after which a broad white streak began. The newlyweds had a modest wedding, they signed their names, went to a restaurant in the evening, celebrated this important event in their lives, and even danced. It was a beautiful couple. Ava was dizzy either from the champagne or from happiness. She was just now admitting to Matthew that she'd fallen in love with him when he was a bum. "Just don't make fun of me, okay? Yeah, I liked you when you came out of the bathhouse. That's when I fell in love. Yes, I noticed your surprise at the time, but I couldn't imagine that such a woman would be interested in a man of no fixed abode. And I got interested, and I don't regret it." They kissed like teenagers. People around them were paying attention to them. But the stares were not judgmental, but rather a little envious. The next day, sitting at the computer in the evening, Matthew saw a photo of himself and Ava from the restaurant. There was a picture of them kissing. The picture was very beautiful. But who would want to take a picture of them, and even more so, to put it on the internet? He saw that under the photo there were already more than 5,000 likes and many comments. Some wished happiness, others were jealous that at such an age they had kept the love alive. A lot was written. And one comment was unexpected. "This, I think, is the former head of a construction firm who was thought to be missing, but he turned out to be alive." Who wrote it was unknown, the nickname was a funny SSS. It was unclear who it was. He decided to show the photo to Ava. "Look, you and I have become stars. The paparazzi are after us. Soon they'll be asking for autographs. Get ready, darling, for glory." Why was this put on the internet and who did it? I have no idea. And I don't care who did it. You're beautiful. I'm pretty, too. Let them be jealous, he smiled. That's what he said for Ava. He didn't care about the picture itself. What he did care about was who had written the comment. Since he wasn't a computer genius himself, he approached the guys at work, asking them to find out where the number was from. But all they could find out was that it was from abroad. So it could have been Ethan or Saren. All right, then. Let them know I'm alive and I'm all right. He didn't tell his wife, so she wouldn't have to worry about it. Matthew soon took over as head of the department. His predecessor was being honored in retirement. One day, sitting in front of the television set, they were watching a program that showed beautiful apartments, houses, and farmhouses. Suddenly, Matthew said, "Ava, why don't we get a bigger, more comfortable apartment or build a house? How do you feel about that?" She didn't want to leave this cozy apartment either, and she said she would think about it. But life told her what decision she needed to make. One evening her son called, congratulated her on her wedding day, apologized for not being able to get away. He said he was coming home with his family. "Can we all fit in a 2-room apartment?" the guy asked, knowing the answer beforehand. "Yeah, sure, come on over, son, we'll accommodate you," Ava replied without hesitation. "Mom, I'll try to get an apartment later so you won't be embarrassed, but we'll all have to live together for a while." In the evening, she told her husband that her son and his family were coming to stay with them in the apartment for a while. And then she asked which room we were going to take. "No," Matthew smiled, "I'll start looking for a new place tomorrow. If we can't get one before he arrives, we'll rent it, and he can settle in here. You see how well everything worked out, and you didn't even have to think about it." My son arrived a month later. There were 4 of them. The 2 beautiful boys went straight into the apartment and looked around. Ava made dinner. Matthew bought wine and toys for the children, and we had a very good time. In the evening, Matthew and Ava began to get ready to go home. "Where are you going, Mom?" the boy wondered. "Son, Matthew has rented an apartment, and you stay here. I've already put my things in my suitcases, and we'll pick them up. I feel bad that I just kicked you out. We wanted to buy a bigger apartment anyway, so it was no big deal. My husband rented a 1-room apartment so far, very richly furnished." Ava was insanely happy. It was possible not to rush and quietly choose a flat they liked. One evening, Matthew received a phone call from a woman. "Hello. I don't know you personally. I am the daughter of the former CEO of Enterprise, Barbara. I would like to meet with you to discuss a very important matter. Where would be convenient for you?" "You can come up to my house," Matthew replied, barely hiding his surprise. "Sure. Give me the address." An hour later, the apartment rang. When Matthew opened the door, he saw a small, frail girl with huge green eyes. "Hello, I'm Barbara. Come on in." There were teacups, candy, and cookies on the table. Tea with lemon smelled good. "Have a seat," Ava suggested, carrying the kettle in her hands. "Meet my wife Ava," Matthew introduced. He saw the surprise in his guest's eyes and added, "Saren ran away with your husband, having previously sold my apartment. Took all the money out of the accounts, divorced me. The maximum program was accomplished. I became a free man and married a beautiful woman. Sit with us, Ava." "Barbara, I'm listening to you." "Did you hear what happened to our company?" she asked and took a sip of tea. Matthew nodded. "Yes, I searched the internet for information. I know your father died shortly after you got married, and your husband Stephen took over as CEO. But he couldn't handle the job. He didn't have enough experience, and then he withdrew all the money from the company's accounts and fled abroad with my ex-wife. The company exists because of the Deputy General Manager of Operations, if I'm not mistaken. It was your late father's old guard, and he keeps the firm afloat somehow by finding orders and using his connections." "Yes," Barbara nodded. "When Dad wasn't there, things went bad for the company. Stephen couldn't run such a huge machine. Worse, he didn't listen to the professionals who had worked since the founding of this company and understood more than he did. His ambition led to many people quitting, not wanting to be humiliated by his attitude, others simply ignoring him. And when he ran away, stealing from the company, I thought I was going to die. I was so sorry for Dad's hard work. He was so hopeful that Stephen would turn out to be a worthy successor. But Dad, who had always been so good at reading people, was wrong about him as a specialist. I won't go on about his personal qualities. All this time, for almost 2 years, the company was quietly managed by my father's friend. You're right, an excellent specialist and a wonderful person. Thanks to him, the company is still afloat, but stormy. And then a week ago, he got sick. He's in his 70s. I thought he would recover and get out again. But his wife called and said he couldn't work anymore. I was in tears. He told me to come to you. Of course, if I had more time, I could find someone else and not bother you, but I don't know where or who to turn to. Help me, Matthew, take over the business as general manager. I have great faith in you. Matthew sat with his head down, wrapping and unwrapping candy wrappers. He looked nervous and unsure of what to say to the frightened girl. Barbara, give me 24 hours to think about it. I don't know if I can handle such a corporation either. My friend and I had a much smaller company than yours. What if I let you down? I know you can do it, Matthew. If you were recommended to me by Daddy's friend, then everything will be all right. I'm asking you, no, I'm begging you. She looked at him with eyes full of despair. All right, Matthew agreed, but I'm working now, and I can't leave my department like that. And if they ask me to work 2 weeks, I have to do it. I'll wait 2 weeks, but please don't take longer than that. After seeing Barbara off, Matthew asked Ava, what do you think? What do you think of this offer? I think you have to agree. What you do now is not your thing. You like to build, to watch houses being built before your eyes, that's your thing. And you're only working now because you don't want to sit on my neck. So you say. Thank you for believing in me, Matthew smiled. At night he didn't sleep at all. It turns out how abruptly life can change in 5 minutes. Turns out 5 minutes is a lot. He's starting a new life. The next day he talked to the director, told everything as it was. Who would you advise to take your place? The director interjected. Of course, Logan. A smart guy, a great character, the soul and brain of the department. I think he'll do fine. Well, I'm sorry to let you go, Matthew, but I have a feeling there's big things waiting for you. Good luck to you, and he patted the man on the back in a friendly manner. Here it is, a white streak. Or rather, it's beginning. Tomorrow I go to a new job. Barbara was waiting for him outside the office. Matthew she saw from afar. You don't drive? She inquired. No, my ex-wife sold my car along with the apartment, but I guess by status I have to buy. You can use the service one for now, Barbara suggested, or Willie, our chauffeur, is already worried that he won't be needed. They walked to the auditorium, where all the employees of the company were gathered. Wow, thought Matthew to himself. What a corporation. That's the scale of it. Dear friends. Barbara began her speech. Today she no longer looked like the frightened little girl who had sat at his house. She was a confident young woman who knew exactly what she had done to save her father's company. I want to thank you all for not running away like rats from a sinking ship, but for helping to save our firm. I really hope that the dark days for the company are over, and now everything will be just fine. This is the new CEO, Matthew. She wanted to add a few more words, but everyone stood up and started clapping, and Barbara, too, looking at the faces of the workers, clapped. Thank you for this credit of trust. To be honest, I don't even know why I deserved it, but it feels good. I won't say any big words, they just won't help bring the company to its former heights. Let's work hard, and you and I will succeed. That ended the meeting, and everyone went to their places of work. And Matthew began going through the documents in his office. He sat down at his desk and looked at the clock, which showed 10 o'clock, and when he looked up, it was 6:30 p.m. No one came by and called me, Matthew asked himself. When he left the office, he saw that the secretary was going home. You don't need me today anymore, Lucy asked, blushing slightly. Did someone come into my office today? We looked in, but you were all worked up and no one else dared to bother you. I see. But I got a lot of things figured out, the new CEO said in a cheerful voice. All evening he told Ava about his first day at work. She watched him carefully and even listened to him somewhere, but mostly admired him. He was in his element. Her Matthew had only begun to live from today. A lot of people complain about their jobs, and it seems like people only go there because they have to, family, kids, mortgages. But in front of her sat a man who truly loved his job. After all, the best job is when you do what you like. It should be something you don't have to look at your watch all the time, but you enjoy it all the time. And soon its work will be rewarding. That's the best reward there can be. She woke up to Matthew's bracing of her. Ava, are you asleep? I'm telling you, and you can't even hear me. I do better. I admire you and I'm happy for you. You're starting to live life to the fullest. One Sunday afternoon, while walking in the park near their house, he remembered old Mary, his parents' neighbor. I am a very ungrateful person. She met me like that, gave me good clothes, money for the trip, fed me, and I left and forgot about the person. I must be sure to visit her. What's the matter? Let's go now, suggested Ava, let's buy some presents and visit. And really, come on. After buying a bag full of groceries, they took a cab and drove to the place where Matthew spent his childhood, where his parents lived, where it was carefree and fun. His grandparents were still alive, and there were no problems. Mary, thank God, was alive and sitting on the bench outside the driveway. Good afternoon, Matthew greeted loudly. Do I know you? She saw poorly and certainly did not recognize this respectable man. Mary, I'm Matthew. Remember? It's you. I can't see well anymore. And I come to you with my wife, this is Ava. Get to know her. And also with gifts. Oh, thank you, but I have everything. How much do I need? Let's go inside. And she went ahead of them, showing the way. They had a wonderful time, drinking tea, reminiscing about Matthew's parents. Oh, I forgot to tell you last time. The policeman came several times, didn't he? Your father insisted that a criminal case be opened. That's what they're looking for. He came and asked if you'd been around, and last time he came right in front of you, but I told him I hadn't seen you. He left me his card, take it and go to him and tell him you're alive. He'll be glad this case is closed. And you can tell him about those gangsters before they hurt somebody else. Just call him first. He might not even work there anymore. And leave me your contacts, just in case I need you. Sure, and he held out his card to her. After thanking his former neighbor, Matthew said, "Goodbye." And, as he was leaving, he discreetly left the money in the hallway, next to the woman's purse. It will come in handy, he thought. And Senior Lieutenant Riley was working, and when he heard it was Matthew calling, he was shocked. Taking a sip of water, he found nothing cleverer to ask how. Where are you from? I'm from home, Matthew replied, smiling. Do I need to come to you, or has my case already been closed? No, they didn't. Come, of course. I have a lot of questions for you. And, having set a time to meet, they said, goodbye. Now that's what I understand, the shocked officer poured water into himself again. The next day, the new general manager alerted the secretary that he would be in time for lunch and went to meet with Senior Lieutenant Riley. He was already expecting him. The chief of police himself came into Riley's office to look at Matthew like some kind of museum piece. Glad to see you in good health. Unfortunately, we couldn't help you, we couldn't find those bandits. All right, the lieutenant will tell you everything, and the chief policeman said, goodbye. Hello. Have a seat. Tell me everything you remember, and then I'll tell you everything we managed to do. We couldn't help you personally, but we didn't sit idly by and caught 2 of the kidnappers. I'll show them to you later, and you can identify them. Can we watch it right now and I'll start the story? Asked Matthew. I just can't wait. The officer smiled. Okay, all right. And he took 10 pictures out of the folder. Matthew looked at them for a long time and recognized the big, boxer-looking one with the huge biceps and the skinny one with no front teeth. All 4 months he'd come in the same tracksuit. It was the same suit he was wearing in the photo. The third wasn't. Recognize anyone? Inquired the lieutenant. Yes, these two were guarding me for the whole 4 months. And they forced me to sign documents, mostly a general power of attorney for my ex-wife Saren. But there's no third person here. That's right. He was killed in custody. And we caught these guys when they kidnapped the next businessman and kept him in the barn, just like you. Now it's your turn to talk, and the lieutenant prepared to listen, having turned on the recorder. When I came out of the cafe, I didn't have much time left before the train. When I took just a few steps, someone hit me on the head from behind, and I lost consciousness. And when I came to, I realized that I was in the trunk of a car. It smelled like gasoline, and I was shaking a lot. It was a long drive. We were standing during the day, waiting for the evening. They gave me something to drink, and I fell asleep again. Most likely there were sleeping pills. They took me to a neighboring oblast. But I found out this when I was already released. Then they brought me and left me in a barn. No one came to see me for 3 days, and I was sitting there with a gag in my mouth and my hands tied. Then I managed to pull the gag out. And I felt better. What else? They beat me, demanded that I sign a power of attorney and some other documents. By the end of the month, they broke me. Everything hurt, my kidneys, my back, my stomach. They fed me like a dog. I signed everything and thought I would be released right away, but they said, no, there was no command. And then I realized that my wife needed time to sell all my belongings in peace. When she had already gone abroad, I was released. Well, that's pretty much it. I went to my parents' house. Other people lived there, although the apartment was privatized. They say they bought it. You would also find out how they got there. Maybe residential services are involved. I'd also like to get my parents' things and pictures. It's all dear to my heart, you know? And the apartment is mine after all, why should I give it up? Then a kind woman helped me. She let me stay at her country house. Well, I guess that's it. The rest of the details of my personal life have nothing to do with crime. I see, nodded Lieutenant Riley, your father reported you missing. Your wife didn't even come. We thought, well, where can a man who has to leave go? He'll be somewhere near the train station. We decided to go to all the places that were nearby. The first was a cafe, we showed your photo and the waiter recognized you. We asked for the tape from the security camera. But we were told that they had been broken that night. The security guards couldn't catch the culprits. No one saw anything. Your daddy came with us, cursed, but on the one hand we understood him, his son, after all. But on the other hand, at least there must be a clue. I personally went around to all the nearby houses, interviewed the old ladies. They are vigilant. But no one knew anything. Several times I went to your neighbor Mary. A very nice intelligent woman, you could see that she wanted to help, but she didn't know anything either. And then, finally, you called yourself. I honestly thought someone was playing a joke on me. I'm very happy to see you alive and well, Matthew. Leave me your contacts. And we'll find out something about the apartment, and I'll let you know. What about these bandits? The trial is coming up. You will go as a witness. I will give your number to the lawyer of the businessman who went the same way as you did, and he will decide for himself when and where to meet you. They shook hands and said, goodbye. A couple of days later a man called him and introduced himself as Bill's lawyer. Matthew somehow didn't pay attention to the last name and first name. And when they met in a cafe to talk about the upcoming trial, he recognized Bill, with whom they had started a construction business, in the businessman who had also been molested. They did not throw themselves into each other's arms, But after saying hello, one said to the other, "Hi, good to see you." Matthew asked the lawyer to arrange a meeting with the bandits to ask who the customer was. "And you don't know, or even guess?" the lawyer asked in surprise. "That's exactly what I'm guessing, but I want to know for sure." "All right, I'll try to set it up, but her topic will be confrontation, otherwise they might not allow it." The bandits acted brazenly. Maybe they hoped they would be protected at the last moment. Or maybe they went to the zone as to their home, hoping there to rest from their righteous labors. "Do you recognize these people?" "Yes, I recognize it. They were the ones who kept me in the barn for 4 months. And the smaller one beat me with such fierceness, as if I had stolen something from him or hurt him." "Who told you to press me, and why did you kidnap me?" They were silent, turned away, not wanting to talk. "Do you know the names of the customer?" "No, we don't." "What are we, the police, to ask for names and documents?" "Okay. And if I show you the pictures, would you recognize them?" Matthew purposely found pictures of Stephen and Saren on the internet, just in case they might come in handy. Showing a picture of his lover's wife, he hoped deep down that it wasn't them. But in vain. "That's the man talking to us. And he showed us your face," he nodded his head at Matthew, said the thug who looked like a boxer. "He kept trying to give us less money, and then this woman came and gave us as much as we asked for, and we did everything." They argued with each other. The man said she was wasting money, that they would need the money themselves. And she convinced him that any work should be paid, or, "You go and do everything yourself." He argued and objected for a long time, but then he gave in after all. "She asked me to get all the signatures out of you as quickly as possible." When they were taken away, Matthew and Bill said, "Goodbye," to the lawyer and left the police building. "What do you do?" asked Bill. "I am the CEO of Enterprise." "You're in Enterprise?" the friend wondered. "Yes. I've been working for a week now." "What do you do, or have you been doing? Have you been robbed of your business?" "I helped my wife with beauty salons, and when she gave birth to twins, I started doing it myself. The business began to bring in a lot of income. I began to open more salons, I rented good places. It seems I crossed someone's path. Then I found out who. That's me to these bandits and ordered. But I was luckier. My wife stayed, immediately raised a fuss. But still had to give up 3 salons. And most of the business remained. But they beat me just like you and demanded that I sign documents transferring the business to the son of an authority. You know, I hate to talk about it. Let's get it over with." "All right," Matthew agreed, "I'll come to the trial. I'll see you there. Greetings to the wife." And they parted like complete strangers. It was as if the 5 years of university, when they had been close friends, had never happened. Time passed. Matthew told Ava how the trial went. These thugs were each given 17 years in custody. The lawyer made this rant to the prosecutor: "They're remorseful, let's give them another chance." He himself did not believe what he was saying. And these two sat there hiding their smiles. The only thing they were remorseful about was that they hadn't done their last assignment entirely cleanly. When Bill was grabbed, they were wearing masks. They did not expect him to resist and accidentally tear off the little bandit's mask and see his face. The judge said, "No mercy. This is the 3rd time they've gone there. Life doesn't teach them anything, that's why they're 17 years old and that's it. They will have time to appeal their sentence." "Were you called as a witness?" asked Ava. "Yeah. I waited a long time, but then I got called up and Bill." So they were sitting at the table having a nice conversation, but suddenly Matthew, turning his gaze to the TV, became silent and pale. He turned up the volume. Ava looked up and saw a woman's face all over the screen. The woman was good-looking, only her eyes were like those of a beaten dog. "Who is that?" asked Ava, looking anxiously at her husband. "Saren," he answered briefly and put his finger to his lips, gesturing for silence. From the program it became known that Saren's excellent language skills and proficiency helped her open a small law office abroad. At first, the prices for her services were so low and her help so effective that people went to her. Within a year, she had promoted herself. She got bored of working just doing her job, even if for good money. She came up with an ingenious scheme to steal from rich people and used it very successfully. But the greed of her companion and the desire to get everything at once led to the fact that the system could not stand and broke down. Saren got caught alone. Stephen managed to get away with her money. He is now a wanted man. And she faces a large prison sentence with compensation for all the victims. She had lived her whole life justifying her every immoral action by the fact that she had a goal to achieve by any means necessary, even by theft and betrayal. She had forgotten that life is a boomerang, and if you don't stop in time, it hurts you on the head. Now she is abandoned by her lover, just as Matthew was once abandoned and robbed. I never tire of repeating that life is a clever thing. It puts everything in its place. It doesn't tolerate clutter, the reporter said. And a commercial for some kind of detergent began, and Matthew, with the sound turned off, sat staring at one point. He did not know what else to say. It made him feel sad and disgusted. In his mind, he put a fat end to the whole story. He was alive, working, with his beloved woman by his side. He had no idea what more he could ask of the Almighty. Probably nothing. Just to thank him for what he has. "Are you upset?" asked Ava. No, everyone got what they deserved. This proves once again that you shouldn't make money by dishonest work. Evil doesn't do good. You must always remember the boomerang principle. People have always had a need for easy money. And now it has taken on a kind of manic nature. No one wants to work hard. "Okay, let's change the subject," Ava suggested. "You better tell me how you're doing at work." Matthew smiled, shook his head, and said, "My young people are testing me for expertise. Can you imagine? How competent I am in matters of production. I didn't realize at first that a battle test was going on. But on the second question, I recognized their move and asked how many more questions were on the ticket. The first one I answered, 'What will you put?' Everyone was silent. One guy in the production department said loudly, 'Sit down, Matthew, you got 5. Can you imagine? They gave me a test. Then I realized that they must understand why they should respect me. And that it's not just because I'm the CEO. My subordinates need to feel confident in me, that I know exactly where to lead them.' We laughed, and that was the end of the meeting. Good guys, competent. I realized that we should not be stingy with praise the good work in front of everyone. And I think things will go well with them." A month had passed since the news of Saren's adventures. Everything was slowly being forgotten, but one of the news reports said that Stephen the businessman had been detained at the airport with false papers. The airport was relatively small. By arriving there on purpose, he hoped that there would be less police there for him to fly out and get lost in his new country. And he almost succeeded, but the flight was delayed and he was taken off the flight. He said it was a mistake and they would have to publicly apologize to him. His briefcase, which hung on his belt like a mailbag, was full of money Stephen had won from his accomplice. So that's the news. Matthew walked around sad, and only a call from the police about his apartment took some of the painful memories away. "Matthew, I've been to the people who live in your apartment. They really do have the paperwork in order. There's even a check with the amount they paid for the apartment," the senior lieutenant said. "Yes, I didn't doubt that they paid for it. I'm wondering who sold them this apartment, mind you, a privatized one. That's a crime." "You're right," agreed Riley, "and since you said that they gave you the documents for the apartment, I consulted a lawyer on the matter. It will not be difficult to restore your documents, because the privatization contract is made in 2 copies and the second is kept in the archives of the state. Most likely, the new tenants simply destroyed your copy because they were sure that they would never meet you again. In addition, the city registration office, where the title to the privatized apartment was executed, must have certified copies of the documents and information about who owns it. But if you had lost all the documents for the apartment in all the state bodies, which is impossible in principle, then your chances to prove the truth would be reduced to 0. But you and I understand that this is impossible. Therefore, the restoration and proof of rights to real estate through the court, more than realistic. All the more so that we have already made inquiries and found that your documents are in place. You can restore them. And then, having the documents in hand, you can act further. So, I think, if we do not return the apartment, at least the money for it will be possible to get. About the things that were in the apartment, the albums and whatnot, the new owners put everything in the closet. And they use your furniture. If you want, we can go there together, and you can take everything away. Yes, I want to go with you and get my stuff and my parents' stuff, Matthew immediately agreed. Okay, when you're ready, call ahead so I can pick a time, too, Riley said and said, goodbye. Having recovered the documents for the apartment, Matthew contacted a police officer, and they came to the address where he used to live. And there he was in his parents' apartment. Seeing the condition of the things that were so dear to his heart, Matthew became homesick. The apartment was a mess of dirt. The beautiful table in the center of the room my parents had bought at an antique store. It was stained with tea and, apparently, bread had been cut on it. It bled my heart to see it all. Between the windows hung a late 19th century mirror. My God! What a state it was in! Flies had been sitting on it for years, and the silver frame was falling off for some reason. I'll take the mirror, table and chairs. My parents bought them all in antique stores. And these people don't care what you cut your bread on, or what mirror you look in, Matthew growled, barely able to contain his anger. And how will we live without a table and chairs? Put it back, the landlord shouted, how can you prove it's yours? We bought it ourselves, understand? Matthew, answering nothing, went into the pantry and brought out a photo album, in which he quickly found a picture of the whole family sitting around the table. Do you recognize me? Now look at the table. Do you recognize me? Keep looking. That's my mother. Do you recognize the mirror? I took her picture. The day she and my father bought it. If that's not enough for you, you can call your neighbor Mary. She was a frequent visitor and saw all these purchases. So shut your mouth. I don't want anyone else's, but I won't give up mine either. What an art connoisseur. These are my parents' things, and they are dear to me. There are stores full of furniture. My parents also had some antique cutlery and crockery, and Matthew immediately made his way into the kitchen. He knew very well where they lay. He opened a small drawer and took out a beautiful box, velvet with monograms. There were 6 spoons and 6 forks and knives. Then he took the deep plates, but instead of 6, there were only 3. Where are the others? Frowned Matthew at the subdued landlord. Broke it, he muttered, in a drunken rage. He took the plates, the Japanese tea service, the wine glasses from the French glassblowers. I'll take that, too. Then the man called for a car. The movers quickly disassembled the table, removed the mirror, and took 6 chairs. Then he went into the pantry, where the photo albums, his father's manuscript, and his mother's drawings were piled. He stacked everything neatly in a bag and carried it away. I'm filing a lawsuit where you tell me who you bought the privatized apartment from and get it or my money back, Matthew said. The owner was clearly nervous. I gave the money in full. She's the one to ask. From whom? The lieutenant immediately asked. The man realized he'd said too much and shut up. When everyone went outside, the policeman told Matthew that he would stay here. Why? The man wondered. The owner of the apartment was nervous. I think he's going to solve the problem now, without delaying it. You can't procrastinate in a case like this. And that means he may go along with the one or the other who sold him your apartment. Not stupid, Matthew agreed, shaking the senior lieutenant's hand, and went to the car. And the policeman hid behind a tree and waited. He did not have to wait long. The owner ran out of the doorway, nervously looking around, and when he saw nothing suspicious, he headed off at a brisk pace. In the meantime, Matthew returned home and embraced his wife. Ava, I think we probably won't get the apartment back. At best, they'll give us the money for it, or maybe not. But, you know, I don't want to live there. The new tenants have turned the apartment into such a squalor that it would cost as much to renovate as a new 2-bedroom apartment. Yes, Ava sighed, but what a beautiful place it is. So much greenery nearby, the subway. And what beautiful stores. No matter what you say, it's a residential neighborhood, and the houses are somehow in the back. You can't hear the noise of the main thoroughfare. Don't worry, I've already found us a 2-bedroom apartment. This weekend we'll go and take a look, and if you like it, we'll start the repairs and move in. Do you agree? No, Matthew, I love this apartment so much. It's so cozy, so tastefully done. Shall we buy it? Well, how much room do the two of us need? Let's stay. All right, if that's the way you want it, I'll try to talk to a realtor. Maybe she can help us, the man agreed and pecked his wife on the nose. And Senior Lieutenant Riley followed the landlord. He was very surprised that he ran past the housing office and ran into the entryway of a nearby house. The man called apartment number 31 and, when it was opened, went inside. The policeman went to work and found out that the officer in charge of these houses was George, and that's who he went to. Do you remember who you have living at number 10, in apartment 31? Of course I know all mine. Wake me up at night and I'll tell you their names. After all, I've been at the precinct for 8 years. Then tell me, Riley hurried, Elin lives there, works as head of the housing authority. The woman is clever and cunning. Husband also works there as a chauffeur. The children are adults, don't live with them. She provided them with apartments. People are not poor. During the time she worked in the administration, she made all the right acquaintances and lives according to the principle, you for me, I'll give it to you. That's probably all. Do you think it would be better to talk to her on our property or hers? Well, if the question you want to ask her isn't very comfortable for her, then it's better, of course, on ours. The precinct officer nodded in agreement. I don't think she'll like it, but I hear you. Thank you. The next day the head of the Housing and Utilities Department was summoned to the police. She was mentally prepared for it, so she was not scared, but knew what she was summoned for. At 10 a.m., there was a knock on the door of Senior Lieutenant Riley's office. Yes, come in. I have been summoned. I am Elin. Come in. Have a seat, we're going to have a serious and long talk. You scare me, the woman smiled defiantly. Really? I thought you weren't the shy type. That's how quickly you sell privatized apartments. You tell me, who gave you the right to sell an apartment that doesn't belong to you in any way? I wasn't selling, Elin said confidently. Really? So we can go to the apartment now and ask the tenants to move out within 24 hours, Riley smiled. Well, yeah. They live there illegally. The senior lieutenant stared blankly at this self-assured and even insolent woman sitting in front of him, and did not understand her game. And who let them live there illegally? It wasn't you, was it? And if you know it was illegal, why did you allow it? I've seen all the documents for the apartment, I've seen the receipt with a large amount of money on it. The new landlord claims he gave you all the money. What do you say to that? Just don't say anything untrue, it's embarrassing. You're a grown-up lady, and you're trying to get out of it so ugly. I'm telling the truth. I felt sorry for them. They promised to find a place to live in a few months and to vacate it. Okay, Riley agreed. Then tomorrow you and the chief precinct cop will go and tell the squatting landlord to move out within 24 hours, okay? The rightful landlord will sue. He's got all the documents on the apartment. He restored them, because the copy that was in the house of the previous tenants was somehow destroyed. Yeah, I got it, the woman agreed, we'll get it done tomorrow. She left the office. Something did not please the senior lieutenant in the way this Elin behaved. And he was right. A couple of hours after she left he received a call from the chief of police telling him to mind his own business and to mind his own business. Riley wanted to explain and even contradict him, but the warden yelled so much that all he had to say was, "That's right." Nearly a month had passed since then. Matthew and Ava often had a son visit with the family. The boys were wonderful, they called Matthew Grandpa. He was thrilled. A handsome man, and already a grandfather. But that didn't embarrass him. The boys loved him and hung on him, not letting him relax. Matthew, Ava's son, once addressed him, "I've been here for 2 months, but I can't get a job. Could you help me? I'm good with computers, I can write programs and do repairs." "Yes, you're the right specialist, I think I can help you. Come back tomorrow afternoon. We have meetings in the morning. All sorts of things are being dealt with there. And by lunchtime I'll be freer and I'll take care of you." "Thank you so much, or my wife would soon throw me out of the house. We can't get the boys into daycare either. And if I make good money, I can give them to a private kindergarten." Another month or so passed. Ava's son worked at Matthew's firm. "How is my son? Is he working? Aren't you ashamed of him? Does he do everything?" Ava inquired. "It's okay," Matthew reassured her. "Matthew," she poked him on the shoulder and asked quietly, "have you given up that 2-bedroom apartment yet?" "No, I haven't said no yet, but I've already arranged with a realtor to buy this apartment like you wanted. She promised to come over the other day and talk about the price." "Matthew," she burrowed into his shoulder again, "let's buy that 3-room apartment, because it would be cramped for the 3 of us in the 1 room." "Why the 3 of us? Do you want one of the boys to come live with us?" smiled Matthew. "No, Matthew, we're going to have a baby of our own." "God, I'm so ashamed. I'm already a grandmother, and I'm going to have a baby." She never looked up at him. He sat there in shock and couldn't get a word out of happiness. "Well, why aren't you talking? You're ashamed too, aren't you? That's it. Tomorrow, I'm going to have an abortion." And then he finally woke up. "You what? What abortion?" "I'm going to be a father for the first time." "Thank you, my dearest, most beloved man. I'm starting to renovate my 2-bedroom apartment." When the repairs were finished, he brought his parents' restored furniture to the new apartment. The table was simply gorgeous. With its shapely legs, it was as good as new. And those high-backed chairs looked very nice and rich. When it became known that a son was going to be born, they began to decorate the room for the boy. The birth was very hard. The baby was born big, almost 4 kilograms. It was a little copy of Matthew. So Ava wouldn't have a hard time, they immediately hired a nanny, a woman in her 50s, who lived with them in the apartment. And it gave the mother a chance to rest. Ava blossomed after giving birth and got a little fat, but it didn't spoil her in the least, it just made her look sexy. The evening was wonderful. The whole family gathered around the table to celebrate little Bruce's birthday. Dad loved him infinitely and kept saying, "Thank you for my son." "Matthew, stop thanking me already. What could I do without you?" "Nothing." Matthew thought for a moment and then answered, "You're right." But lately Ava had begun to notice that for days on end Matthew had been walking around, worrying about something. He'd lock himself in his office, search for something on his laptop, then walk from corner to corner. She did not bother him, she hoped that her husband himself would tell everything. But time passed. He was getting nervous. And Ava still didn't know the reason. One day, unable to stand it, she resolutely opened the door to his office. "Either you tell me everything you've got going on, or I'll blow this whole room to hell." "Not again. I don't want to upset you, Ava." "Yeah, am I so calm when I see how worried you are? You know, it's not working with my parents' apartment. The defenses there are so dumb, there's no way to get in from any direction. And they wanted to reprimand Senior Lieutenant Riley, said if he didn't calm down, he'd lose his job. I don't even know what the right thing to do is. I think the apartment is precious as a memory, but if I start fighting for it, I might endanger not only myself, but also you and your son and Riley. There are some very powerful people involved, and they're not going to give up that easily. And they have a lot of connections, you know. It's not that I'm scared, it's just, and he looked at his wife in a confused silence. "Listen," she said, and gently ran her warm hand over his unshaven cheek, "can't we just give up on this whole thing? I can't force you, of course, but are we living a bad life? After all, the peace and safety of the family, I think, are more expensive than any apartment. What's more, we great have a place to live. The decision, of course, is yours, but you heard me, and I think you will make the right choice." By and large, he no longer expected to get either the apartment or the money back. Of course, it was a pity to lose it as a memory of his parents, so he gave himself the following clear statement: if we manage to get the apartment back, fine, if not, then so be it. He gave all the documents to the lawyer and instructed him to handle the case. And Matthew's son is growing up, that's where you have to look. Time is so fleeting that before you know it, the boy will be in first grade. Matthew worked hard to bring Enterprise back up to its former level. Even though he was not the owner of the construction corporation, but only an employee, he was still very concerned about it and made sure that Barbara never regretted her decision. In the construction industry, you can only be successful if a person really lives for it. And that's exactly what Matthew was: responsible, punctual, serious, reliable, and able to solve any problem quickly. That's why he was a virtuoso negotiator and could convince both client and investor alike that doing business with an enterprise was profitable. There is a lot of competition in the construction market today, and you have to be the best to thrive. And so Matthew rushes home with presents. It's his son's birthday. He is 5 years old. He wanted to celebrate it in a special way, so Ava didn't want to do it just at home. The party was a success. In the evening, while his parents were seeing their guests off, the birthday child fell asleep on the couch in his birthday suit. When the child fell asleep, happy parents drank tea and looked at the presents they had given their son. And most importantly, they were happy that their child was happy. The apartment case dragged on for an entire year, tons of certificates, applications, confirmations, but fortunately a lawyer handled it. The apartment was returned to him after all. The deal was declared illegal because it was made with a clear violation of the law. The new owner was found to be a bad faith purchaser. Matthew only went into the apartment when he got the call that it was vacant. For another 6 months, the apartment was being renovated. And when it was finished, the man offered to give the apartment to his son, Ava. He was about to become a father for the 3rd time. What would they do in a 2-room apartment? "Matthew, it's a regal gift, but maybe we can go in there ourselves? It's my parents' apartment, after all. It would be nice for you to live there," Ava asked. "You know, Ava, it's been so long that I've calmed down. I like our apartment. If we need to, we'll start building a house. We decided to give this apartment as a gift on the birthday of our 3rd child." The lawyers did all the paperwork. The children were shocked by this gift, but then they came to their senses and rushed to thank Matthew. They began to rent out their 2-room apartment. They needed the money badly. They needed shoes and food for their 3 children. One day, on his way out of work, Matthew was walking toward the parking lot. Saren stood in his way. "Well, hello, my ex-husband. I see you're up and around again. Good for you. You didn't break." "You don't look so good," was all Matthew could say. "I know. It's only in the movies that they show that there are good prisons abroad. Don't believe it, they lie. It's very bad there. Are you married or waiting for me?" she smirked. He didn't feel like talking to her at all, but the woman was clearly in the mood for conversation. "So you're married," repeated Saren's question. "Do you have any intentions?" "You know, I just now realized what a fool I was. It's good that you understand everything. It means you won't do anything stupid like that again. Yes, I'm married to the best woman in the world. And we have a son growing up." Late, then, she pouted playfully, and immediately said, "Matthew, take me to work, please." "What?" confused Matthew, "a lawyer?" "Well, yes," the woman nodded. "No, I won't do such a stupid thing again. And I won't step on the same rake a 2nd time. Where is Stephen? He's always been your shadow." He was killed in prison as soon as he got in his cell. Sadly ended your lover. But all right. I'll go. My family is waiting for me. Matthew, she stopped him, give me some money. I'll get a room and look for work. Matthew looked at his ex-wife and realized that she had never looked so pitiful. Looking in his purse, he pulled out what was in it and handed her the bills. You're generous. Thank you. Forgive me, if you can. I've paid the price for my betrayal. She looked at him with a smile. May all be well with you. I forgive you. I can't have it good without you, but I realize I'm too late. Goodbye. But his heart remained deaf. There were no feelings for this woman. One could see that she was ill, her complexion was some gray, earthy color. But Saren had chosen this life for herself, having traded a good job and a loving husband for dubious adventures. As he drove up to the house, he saw his son and his wife. I'm so happy with them, thought Matthew as he took out a huge bouquet of flowers for his lovely Ava.
An amazing story, isn't it? Thank you for listening till the end. I sincerely hope that you truly enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and rate this video. See you in the comments and in